Dear friends, through the mists of time, I would like to take you back to one of England's darkest and most turbulent periods. The year is 1455, and dark clouds hover over the land of England. Under the rule of King Henry VI, the country has become restless and chaotic. I will take you on a journey into the heart of this period, into the heart of wars, intrigues, and power struggles. This is where the Wars of the Roses began. Once upon a time, when peace reigned in the verdant valleys of England, there was a growing tension between noble families. Two powerful branches of the Plantagenet Dynasty, Lancaster and York, laid claim to the throne. But the rivalry between these two dynasties was not just a family feud. It was a struggle for the future of England. To understand this struggle, we must first look at the roots of these two dynasties and the deep enmity between them. The Lancasters were known for their red roses, while the Yorks were known for their white roses. These two roses became symbols of war. In these rose gardens in the heart of England at the time, not only flowers bloomed, but also the fate of the kingdom. King Henry VI, head of the Lancastrian dynasty, ascended the throne at a young age and was known as a weak leader. His rule had led to unrest and rebellion across the country. This weak rule was the spark that ignited the War of the Roses. When you look through the eyes of a sage at the streets and palaces of that time, you can hear people whispering, "The king is weak, the kingdom is in danger," they were saying. Queen Margaret of Anjou was doing everything in her power to compensate for her husband's weakness. But her efforts only led to more hostility and strife. Margaret's determination and ambition brought the country to the brink of civil war. Meanwhile, Richard, Duke of York, the head of the House of York, began to assert his claim to stabilize the kingdom. Richard's courage and leadership qualities made him a hero in the eyes of the people. But this heroism brought him into direct conflict with the House of Lancaster. Dear friends, I want to give you a better understanding of the complexity and drama of this period, as I tell you the background and causes of the Wars of the Roses. I will tell you how the first spark of the war was lit, and how the flame grew. We will take an in-depth look at the beginning of the Wars of the Roses, the Battle of St. Albans and its aftermath. Now I invite you to witness the battlefields, the court intrigues, and the struggles within the kingdom as I draw you into this fascinating story, which is not only a narrative of the past, but also a reflection of human nature and the dynamics of power. Relax, take a deep breath, and embark with me on this fascinating journey. Dear friends, the Plantagenet Dynasty, which left its mark on England's history, symbolizes a period full of powerful kings and queens. From the mid-12th century to the late 15th century, this dynasty left a deep mark on the political and cultural life of England. The Plantagenet family emerged as a branch of the Duchy of Normandy and seized the throne of England. Henry II, as the first king of the Plantagenet dynasty, consolidated his kingdom with important reforms such as strengthening the justice system and central government. The Plantagenets fought many wars both at home and abroad to expand and strengthen their kingdom. Richard I, also known as Richard the Lionheart, was known for his heroism in the Crusades, while John Lackland took the first steps to limit royal power by signing the Magna Carta. However, this powerful dynasty was the scene of deep internal conflicts and throne fights. These internal conflicts eventually sparked a great war between the houses of Lancaster and York. Dear friends, Lancaster and York, two powerful branches of the House of Plantagenet, were two important noble families that laid claim to the throne of England. The House of Lancaster is known for its red roses, while the House of York is known for its white roses. The rivalry between these two dynasties was not limited to personal ambitions and the struggle for power, it was also a battle for the future of England. The House of Lancaster was descended from John of Gaunt. As the third son of King Edward III, John of Gaunt was a powerful and influential figure. His son, Henry Bolingbroke, deposed King Richard II in 1399 and succeeded to the throne as King Henry IV. This strengthened the House of Lancaster's claim to the throne. However, this claim was also seriously questioned by the House of York. The House of York was descended from Edmund of Langley, the fourth son of King Edward III. Richard, Duke of York, as the leader of this dynasty, took a strong stand against the weaknesses and injustices in the governance of the kingdom. Richard staked his claim to take over the rule of the kingdom and rule England strongly again. The rivalry between these two dynasties eventually led to the outbreak of a bloody civil war. Dear friends, one of the main causes of the Wars of the Roses was the poor leadership and mental health of King Henry VI. King Henry VI ascended the throne at a very young age after the death of his father, King Henry V. Despite his father's heroism in wars, Henry was known as a peace-loving and pious personality. However, his weakness and indecision in governing led to unrest and rebellion throughout the kingdom. Henry's mental health further complicated the administration of the kingdom. In particular, a serious mental breakdown in 1453 led to his complete disengagement from governance. During this period, the rule of England was shared between Queen Margaret of Anjou and other nobles. Margaret displayed strong leadership to compensate for her husband's weakness, but this only exacerbated the rivalries and hostilities within the kingdom. Dear friends, behind the scenes of this complex period lay a deep enmity between the two branches of the House of Plantagenet. This enmity between the houses of Lancaster and York was not limited to personal ambitions and power struggles. It was also rooted in old disputes and rivalries between noble families. Rising tensions across the kingdom were further fueled by alliances and animosities among the nobility themselves. Local lords and barons supported either the House of Lancaster or York to protect their own interests and increase their power. This support created new alliances and enmities within the kingdom. In villages, towns, and cities across England, people lived in the uncertainty and fear of this war. Everyone hoped for victory for their own dynasty, while at the same time worrying about the destruction and chaos the war would bring. It was a period that left a deep mark on Britain's history and will live long in people's memories. Dear friends, we will now take a closer look at how these ancient enmities and rising tensions ignited the first spark of the Wars of the Roses. Guided by a sage, we will explore the truths and dramas behind these complex events. Relax, take a deep breath, and come along with me on this fascinating journey. The year is 1455, and unrest and tension run rampant across England. Two powerful branches of the House of Plantagenet, the houses of Lancaster and York, are ready to prove their claim to the throne and take control of the kingdom. During this period, the town of St. Albans, not far from London, the heart of England, will be the scene of a battle that will change the course of history. During this turbulent period, King Henry VI's weak rule and mental breakdowns created a great vacuum in the kingdom. Queen Margaret of Anjou tried to compensate for the weakness of her husband's rule, but these efforts failed to quell the unrest within the kingdom. Richard, Duke of York, leader of the House of York, set out to fill this void for the future of England. On a cool morning in May, Richard, Duke of York, and his allies marched towards St. Albans with a powerful army. Prominent among this army was one of Richard's most loyal allies, the Earl of Warwick, aka Kingmaker. As Richard and his army marched resolutely against the Lancastrian forces, they carried great hope and great apprehension. History was about to be made. When they reached St. Albans, they encountered the strong defensive positions of the Lancastrian army. King Henry VI and his army were on the defensive in the narrow streets and squares of the city. At this point, both sides paused for a moment. But this pause was nothing more than the calm before the storm. The battle began in the early hours of the morning. As the Yorkist army tried to advance through the streets of St. Albans, the Lancastrian forces mobilized all their forces to push them back. The narrow streets of the city were the scene of bloody battles. Richard and Warwick fought on the front lines to give courage and hope to their soldiers. In one of the fateful moments of the battle, Richard, Duke of York, broke through the defenses of Lancaster and captured King Henry VI. This moment became the turning point of the war. The Lancastrian forces, seeing their leader captured, lost morale and began to retreat. The battle cries echoing through the streets of St. Albans gave way to the footsteps and agonized cries of retreating soldiers. At the end of the battle, the Yorkist army declared victory. But this victory was only the beginning of the Wars of the Roses. The Battle of St. Albans echoed across England and deepened the enmity between the two branches of the House of Plantagenet. This battle was not only a military victory, but also the beginning of a tragedy that reverberated deep into the history of England. Following this battle, Richard, Duke of York, took control of the kingdom. But this was a temporary victory. The clashes between the Lancastrian and York dynasties were only the first act of a bloody war that would last for years. The Battle of St. Albans was the spark that lit the flame of the Wars of the Roses, and that spark changed the history of England forever. The captivity of King Henry VI meant not only the imprisonment of a king, but also the uncertain fate of a nation. Henry was a peaceful and pious king, but his mental health made him weak in governance. This weakness paved the way for the rise of the House of York. The capture of the king was an event that reverberated through the streets of London. As the people questioned who was the real king, a deep uncertainty began to reign in the country. In this turmoil, a female figure emerged, Margaret of Anjou. As Henry's wife, Margaret was not only a queen but also a strong leader. With her courage and determination, she tried to compensate for her husband's weakness. She was determined to do all she could to break the power of the House of York. Throughout Henry's captivity, Margaret went to great lengths to secure the future of their son Edward and to protect the legacy of the House of Lancaster. Margaret was not only a political figure, but also played an active role on the battlefields. She fought hard to restore Henry to the throne, plotting against York's victory. During this period, Margaret's courage and determination was admired by many and hated by others. However, Margaret never gave up and never stopped defending the rights of the House of Lancaster. After the Battle of St. Albans, England had become a battlefield. The rivalry between the houses of Lancaster and York was felt in every corner of the country. However, the brief period of peace that followed each war caused these conflicts to subside for a while. Between 1455 and 1459, there were various disputes and temporary peace treaties between the parties. During this period, small-scale conflicts continued all over England. The houses of York and Lancaster used these short periods of peace to regroup their forces and make strategic plans. But this peace was fragile for both sides. Just one spark could trigger a major war again. Margaret of Anjou was not idle during this period. She contacted her allies in Europe to rally support for King Henry's restoration to the throne. Margaret's diplomatic efforts won new allies for the House of Lancaster. Meanwhile, the House of York was making its own plans. Richard, Duke of York, was rallying his supporters to strengthen his claim to the throne. By 1459, this temporary period of peace was over and conflict flared up again. Both sides were rapidly moving towards a great war that would ultimately decide who would be the winner. England would once again face the dark side of war. By 1460, tensions were running high across England. The rivalries between the two dynasties were felt not only within the palace walls but also on the battlefields. One of the most important of these conflicts was the Battle of Northampton. The city of Northampton in the northeast of England was the scene of this great battle. The House of York, led by their leader Richard, Duke of York and the Earl of Warwick, launched a major offensive against the Lancastrian forces. This attack was not only a military conflict, but also a strategic move. The House of York aimed to exploit the king's weakness and the cracks within the House of Lancaster to gain the upper hand. On the day the battle began, the sky was covered with gray clouds. As the soldiers marched out onto the battlefield, they could hear the silent cries of a land steeped in history with every step. Richard and the Earl of Warwick carefully positioned their troops, while the Lancastrian forces rallied under the banner of King Henry. But Henry was there more as a symbol than as a leader, because of his spiritual weaknesses and political ineptitude. In the first moments of the battle, the Yorkist forces gained a strategic advantage. The Earl of Warwick devised a bold plan of attack to break through enemy lines, which was successfully executed. The Lancastrian forces were caught off guard by this unexpected attack and began to retreat rapidly. Meanwhile, the chaos and panic on the battlefield caused King Henry's bodyguard to disperse. King Henry was tossed like a leaf in the midst of battle. His weakness had a negative effect on the morale of the Lancastrian forces. York forces took advantage of this and captured the king. By the end of the battle, Henry was a prisoner of York. This was not only the captivity of a king, but also the loss of morale and prestige for the House of Lancaster. Margaret of Anjou was devastated when her husband was captured again. But this brave woman never gave up. Margaret became even more determined to protect their son Edward and defend the rights of the House of Lancaster. Her resistance gave morale to the Lancastrian forces and drew them back to the battlefield. It was a cold December day in 1460. Wakefield in Yorkshire, in the north of England, was on the brink of a great battle that would go down in history. Richard of York had consolidated his power after his victory at Northampton and was beginning to see himself as the rightful ruler of the kingdom. But far from accepting this, the House of Lancaster was burning with revenge. Margaret of Anjou in particular, after the captivity of her husband King Henry, was even more determined and ambitious against the House of York. Richard was stationed at Wakefield Castle. With him was his loyal friend and ally Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. The forces of York were safe behind the castle walls on cold winter days. But Margaret of Anjou and her Lancastrian forces were determined to weaken the House of York and destroy Richard. Margaret therefore gathered a powerful army and marched on Wakefield. When Richard received word of the enemy's approach, he quickly made preparations for battle. However, Lancastrian forces were outnumbered and Wakefield Castle's defenses were weak. Despite these disadvantages, Richard, a brave and determined leader, rallied his army and prepared for battle. The Earl of Warwick was ready to join the battle with his loyal soldiers. When the day of battle arrived, dark clouds gathered over Wakefield. The land, covered in snow and ice, groaned with the footsteps of soldiers. Richard stood at the head of his army, encouraging them and instilling faith that they would win this battle. Margaret, however, saw this battle as a personal showdown and would show no mercy. Lancastrian forces launched a powerful attack. Under heavy snowfall, the two armies clashed. Richard fought bravely and led his troops. However, the Lancastrian forces' superior numbers and strategic advantages caused the York forces to retreat and scatter. For all his courage and leadership skills, Richard could not turn the tide of the battle. At one of the most critical moments of the battle, Richard of York found himself surrounded by enemy soldiers. Margaret's soldiers targeted Richard and pursued him. Richard tried to resist them with a last stand. However, the enemy was too numerous, and in the end Richard lost his life on the field, where he had fought so valiantly. Richard's death was a great loss for the House of York and a great victory for the House of Lancaster. Margaret of Anjou was proud to have avenged her husband's death after this victory. But this victory did not mean the end of the Civil War in England. On the contrary, it would lead to even greater hostility and bloodier conflicts. It was a cold and snowy January day in 1461. In the northeast of England, near Mortimer's Cross in Herefordshire, a great battle was taking place that would leave its mark on history. It was an important turning point that would change the balance of the Wars of the Roses. On that day, the weather was overcast and the sky was drawn over England like a gray blanket. Snow accumulated silently everywhere, the silence broken by the metallic clang of the warriors' iron armor and swords. Enemies were on the brink of war, preparing for each other in the cold and gloomy weather. At Mortimer's Cross, Edward, son of Richard of York, leader of the House of York, the great rival of the House of Lancaster, had a great opportunity. Richard of York's death had made him even bolder and more determined. The young Edward inherited his father's legacy and saw this battle as a turning point for victory over Lancaster. Under Edward's leadership, the Yorkist army prepared for battle with great determination to win this important battle. But one of the highlights of this battle was what happened in the sky. On that day, the sun appeared like 3 rainbows in the sky, a strange natural phenomenon that created a mystical atmosphere among the soldiers participating in the battle, some of whom saw this moment as a sign from God. This natural phenomenon was considered a sign that kept the morale of Edward's army high. Edward IV took his position at the beginning of the battle and carefully determined his strategy. The Lancastrian forces planned to enter the battle at the predetermined point, but Edward's prepared and disciplined army was ready to fend off the enemy's strategic moves. Edward had developed a powerful tactic for victory in battle. He organized the army strategically and carefully guided it through each phase of the battle. The moment the battle began, under heavy snowfall and dark skies, a deadly struggle began. Edward's soldiers defended themselves against the enemy's large army and fought with great courage. Although the Lancastrian forces initially offered strong resistance, they gradually began to retreat, thanks to the strategic superiority and fighting prowess of Edward's army. In the middle of the battle, Edward's decisive and strategic actions disorganized and weakened the Lancastrian forces. By effectively commanding his army, Edward disorganized the enemy ranks and ultimately achieved victory. The Battle of Mortimer's Cross was a great success for Edward IV and an important victory for the House of York. It was a critical step towards Edward IV being crowned king. The victory at Mortimer's Cross allowed Edward to consolidate his power and that of the House of York. It also had a major impact on the course of the Wars of the Roses and was a major blow to the House of Lancaster. Edward's post-battle celebrations and the repercussions of the victory significantly altered the political balance in England. However, even after this victory, it would be difficult to say that the war and the conflict were over. For the political rivalries and ambitious leaders of this dark period in England would lead to many more bloody and dramatic events in the pages of history. The year was 1461, and on a cold, gray spring morning in Yorkshire, England, we witnessed the outbreak of a battle buried beneath the snow. The Battle of Towton is remembered as one of the largest and bloodiest clashes of the Wars of the Roses. The aftermath of this battle left deep marks not only on England but also on the entire history of Europe. On the day the battle began, the vast and open fields surrounding Towton offered a broad battleground for both the York and Lancaster armies, equipped with long-range weapons and massive forces. Edward IV's York army, with over 20,000 soldiers, was poised against the loyal supporters of Lancashire. Under the leadership of the Lancaster Dynasty, supporters of King Henry VI responded with an army of 25,000. The clash between these two great forces went down in history as one of the deadliest battles. The battle commenced in the early hours of that cold morning. As the snow-covered ground crunched beneath the warriors' boots, the sounds of clashing swords and shields echoing among metal armor created a symphony of death and victory. Edward IV's strategic brilliance became one of the deciding factors of the battle. The young king employed a clever strategy to turn the tide of the battle. Under his command, the York army formed a wide front and encircled the Lancaster forces, pressing them into a tight corner. This battle was not just a military confrontation, but also a psychological war. Although the Lancaster army had the advantage of numbers and terrain, the tactical superiority of Edward IV's York army shifted the course of the battle. Edward's skill in strategy and tactics was a crucial factor in determining the outcome. The York army prevented their enemies from maneuvering on the battlefield and defeated them with a multi-pronged assault. As the battle neared its end, the snow was stained red with blood, and the scattered weapons among the dead highlighted the brutal nature of the fight. The Lancaster army suffered a significant defeat, with many soldiers losing their lives. This battle marked a great victory for the York dynasty and a powerful opportunity for Edward IV to ascend to the throne. Immediately following the battle, Edward IV's victory was met with excitement and enthusiasm on his return to London. The coronation took place at Westminster Abbey, where Edward was crowned as the new King of England. This moment was not only Edward's personal triumph, but also an event that cemented the York dynasty's dominance in England's political arena. Edward IV's rise to the throne was a crucial turning point during England's Civil War period. Despite his youth, Edward's leadership changed the course of political conflicts and power struggles in England. Under Edward's rule, the power of the York dynasty increased, while the influence of the Lancaster dynasty began to wane. However, Edward's ascent also opened the door to even greater and more complex wars in England's history. Following the Battle of Towton and Edward IV's ascent, the political balance in England shifted. Edward's victory was more than just a triumph in battle, it was a pivotal event that altered the course of the Wars of the Roses and shaped the future of England. Edward IV's reign was marked not only by wars and political struggles but also by social and cultural changes. The year was 1461, a time when cold winter winds ruled over England, and a young, dynamic king, Edward IV, had ascended to the throne. After his great victory at the Battle of Towton, Edward's triumphant cries echoed across England, solidifying the York dynasty's claim to the throne. However, the young king's rise was not only a victory but also the beginning of numerous problems and internal conflicts. Edward IV's early reign was a turbulent period. The king had to deal not only with internal political struggles, but also with betrayals among his own supporters. Edward's ascent drew the wrath of the Lancaster dynasty and its supporters. Yet, one of the greatest threats came from an old ally and major supporter, the Duke of Warwick. Known as Warwick the Kingmaker, Warwick's loyalty to Edward quickly shifted, and he began to pursue his own interests. In the early years of Edward IV's reign, Warwick was the king's most significant supporter and strongest ally. However, over time, Warwick's dissatisfaction with Edward's rule grew. This discontent led to a major internal rebellion and even plans of betrayal. Warwick's schemes to crown himself king plunged England into great chaos. These betrayals by Warwick initiated a chain of significant events threatening both Edward IV and England's future. The year 1469 proved to be a turbulent one for England. Internal uprisings spread across the country, with one of the most important being the conflict known as the Battle of Edgecote Moor. This battle was not just a military clash, but also a symbol of political and social transformation. The rebels led by Warwick were making a significant effort to overthrow Edward IV. This uprising deepened both Warwick's betrayal and England's internal conflicts. The Battle of Edgecote Moor took place in a forested area in northern England. When King Edward IV's army faced Warwick's rebels, the battle led to a series of surprises and complexities. The king's army suffered a major defeat, and Edward IV himself was captured and imprisoned after the battle. This event symbolized the collapse of Edward's government and Warwick's rise to prominence. King Edward's imprisonment created a significant political vacuum and chaos in England. Warwick sought to capitalize on this void to consolidate his own power. However, the events of this period led to important changes affecting not only Edward IV, but also the entire history of England. Warwick's actions to remove Edward from the throne and establish his own control created widespread uncertainty and turmoil across the country. This period is filled with a dramatic story of strategic games played between Edward IV and Warwick, internal uprisings, and battles. Internal conflicts, political betrayals, and military clashes made the early years of Edward IV's reign complex and intriguing. These events profoundly impacted not only England's political landscape but also the internal dynamics of the royal family. Dear friends, as we explore this complex and dramatic period of Edward IV's early years, we see how significant and impactful these historical events were. Warwick's betrayals, internal rebellions, and battles are just a part of this era, but they symbolize the major changes and transformations in England's history. Let us continue to uncover more secrets and stories as we delve into this dark and fascinating period of history. The year was 1471, a time of chaos and struggle across England. During this period, the country's fate would be determined by several major battles and strategic maneuvers. Edward IV's efforts to consolidate his rule, including wars and strategic plays, set off a chain of events that deeply affected not only his own reign, but the entire history of the nation. The Battle of Barnet, in the spring of 1471, marked a significant chapter in England's history. The treachery of Warwick the Kingmaker and Edward IV's reclaiming of his previous government opened the door to a major military struggle. Warwick renewed his efforts to overthrow Edward IV, this time rallying old allies and supporters to his side. However, Edward IV's determined leadership and strong military strategies thwarted Warwick's plans. The Battle of Barnet took place on April 14, 1471, in the town of Barnet, north of London. The morning of the battle began with a foggy atmosphere. Both armies took strategic positions to counter each other. Warwick's supporters were provocatively ready to engage in battle, but Edward IV's army was preparing for an effective counterattack. One of the key factors that shaped the outcome of the battle was Edward's strategic brilliance and leadership on the battlefield. Warwick's army suffered a severe blow in the midst of the battle. Edward IV's men defeated Warwick's forces and Warwick found himself fleeing. This defeat symbolized Warwick's downfall and Edward IV's victory. Warwick was killed by the end of the battle, and this event helped solidify King Edward IV's position on the throne. The Battle of Barnet was a crucial turning point in Edward's struggle to re-establish his dominance in England. However, the unrest and throne struggles in England did not end with the Battle of Barnet. Following the battle, King Henry VI's efforts to reclaim the throne created significant excitement in England's political arena. Henry VI had regained the throne in 1470 with the help of former allies, but this resurgence proved to be short-lived. The Battle of Tewkesbury took place on May 4, 1471, in the town of Tewkesbury, Gloucestershire. This battle was the climax of Henry VI's attempts to regain the throne. After previous failures, Henry made a final push to reclaim power. However, Edward IV's army effectively countered these attacks. The Battle of Tewkesbury is recorded as one of the bloodiest and most dramatic battles in England's history. The results of the battle determined King Henry VI's fate. Edward IV's forces inflicted a heavy defeat on Henry's supporters, and Henry himself was captured by the end of the battle. The outcome of the Battle of Tewkesbury meant that Henry VI's return to the throne was merely a fleeting success and paved the way for significant changes in England's political landscape. After Henry's death, the York dynasty's dominance in England's political arena was further solidified. Ah, dear friends, let us walk through the lands of 1471. King Edward IV had reclaimed the throne after the battles of Barnet and Tewkesbury, igniting a great beacon of hope in the heart of England. These battles marked crucial steps in solidifying his government and reclaiming the throne. However, now a much greater test awaited him, ensuring peace and stability. Edward IV's second reign was a period characterized by meticulous shaping of both domestic and foreign policies. To strengthen his power and bring peace to the country, he undertook a series of strategic maneuvers. The king first acted to reorganize the internal political structure. To ensure domestic peace, he sought to turn many of his enemies into friends and allies. This involved reconciling numerous former rivals, enemies, and even several Lancaster supporters. Edward forgave many rebels and offered them new positions. These steps were aimed at easing tensions with former enemies and ensuring internal tranquility. However, Edward IV's internal policies were not limited to forgiveness and peace efforts. The king also worked to rectify the economy through tax reforms and financial adjustments. By reorganizing the country's wealth resources and increasing state revenues, he achieved economic stability for England. During this period, a broader distribution of the tax burden among the nobility was implemented, helping to maintain financial balance. Edward IV's foreign policies were executed with equal care as his domestic policies. He adopted various strategies to maintain balance in England's international relations and protect the country from potential external threats. Relations with France and Burgundy formed the foundation of his diplomatic efforts. The king sought to balance relations with France, often through peace treaties and diplomatic negotiations. He also carefully managed relations with the Duchy of Burgundy. By strengthening commercial and military ties with Burgundy, Edward IV ensured a more solid international position for England. During this period, Edward IV's efforts towards stability were not limited to military and diplomatic moves. He also worked to strengthen the justice system to ensure internal peace. Reforms in the legal system aimed to enhance the effectiveness of local governance. The king encouraged the swift and effective administration of justice and implemented various reforms to make the legal system fairer. Overall, Edward IV's second reign was marked by his efforts to establish peace and stability. His meticulous approach to domestic and foreign policies ushered England into a prolonged period of stability. The reforms and diplomatic maneuvers of this period laid the foundations for the success of Edward IV's government. Dear friends, the efforts of King Edward IV during this period not only shaped his own destiny, but also that of England. The steps taken to achieve peace and stability, enhancing the country's tranquility and prosperity, had deep and lasting effects on England's political and social structure. Returning to the dusty pages of history in the year 1483, we encounter the unexpected death of Edward IV. Throughout his reign, Edward IV had guided the country in search of peace and stability. However, as he approached the end of his life, a deep current of change began to sweep through England's political atmosphere. The sudden death of King Edward created great uncertainty for both his family and the nation. Following Edward IV's death, the throne was expected to pass to his young son, Prince Edward, who was only 12 years old. This situation brought another figure into the spotlight: Edward IV's brother Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Richard, who would be known as Richard III, would come to be remembered as one of history's most controversial and shadowy figures. Richard's ascent to the throne ignited a series of events that would shape both the governance of England and the future of the country. Richard employed various strategies to establish himself as king. Some viewed his actions as an attempt to capitalize on the power vacuum following Edward IV's death. However, one of the greatest uncertainties during Richard III's reign was associated with the event known as the Princes in the Tower. The Princes in the Tower refers to the disappearance of King Edward IV's young sons, Prince Edward and Prince Richard, in the summer of 1483. The sudden and mysterious disappearance of the children after Richard III's accession to the throne created a wave of shock and speculation throughout England. The Princes in the Tower became one of the greatest mysteries of the period. The Tower was known as the place where the children were held and from which they vanished. The fate of the princes after the incident had a profound impact, not only on Richard III but on the entire future of England. Various theories about the princes' fate emerged, but no definitive information was ever uncovered. This event further darkened the shadow over Richard's reign. Richard III's reign is remembered as one of the most controversial and challenging periods in English history. Upon ascending the throne, King Richard faced numerous difficulties. The early years of Richard's reign were marked by significant social unrest and political strife. His governing style was viewed by many as authoritarian and repressive. One of the greatest challenges of Richard's reign was public reaction. Richard created a strong support base by eliminating many former supporters and rivals. However, these actions generated widespread discontent among the public and nobility. Especially after the Princes in the Tower incident, trust in Richard significantly eroded. While Richard's administration struggled with internal political conflicts, it also faced challenges in foreign relations. England experienced difficulties with both France and Burgundy, leading to the country's increasing isolation on the international stage. Ultimately, Richard III's reign is remembered as a period filled with internal and external challenges. His rule ended following a series of internal conflicts and wars, culminating in the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. Henry Tudor's victory in this battle marked the end of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty's rise to the English throne. Bosworth Field, those sacred grounds that left an indelible mark on England's history. Now prepare to delve into the last major conflict on these lands and the changes it brought. I'm here to unveil the truths and profound effects behind these events lost in the dusty pages of time. In the year 1485, the rural lands of England played host to a battle between two great rivals. King Richard III fought to defend his throne from the void, while Henry Tudor, who would later be known as Henry VII, stood as a symbol of justice and renewal. This battle seemed almost predestined to bring an end to Richard's reign. Richard III's government was shaken by increasing unrest and social tension within the country. Internal and external pressures had placed Richard in a difficult position. On the brink of war, Bosworth Field became a decisive battleground for these two adversaries. Richard III's military strategies created a precarious situation among both his loyal allies and rivals. Henry Tudor, meanwhile, prepared for the battle both internally and externally, making great efforts to win the support of the people. As the morning of the battle arrived, Bosworth Field was shrouded in a silence that hinted at the impending clash. On one side were Richard's forces, and on the other Henry Tudor's army. Both sides had completed their preparations to face each other. Richard was known as a brave leader on the battlefield, but this battle would mark his end. During the battle, Henry Tudor's strategic moves allowed him to gain a significant advantage over Richard's forces. Richard's allies wavered at critical moments, increasing Henry's chances of victory. Richard continued to fight valiantly as the battle progressed, but as the end approached, he was on the brink of inevitable defeat. Henry Tudor secured the victory at Bosworth Field with decisive maneuvers. And so the great moment arrived. Richard III was killed on the battlefield. The year 1485 marked a turning point in English history, with the end of this great conflict. Richard's death signified Henry Tudor's victory and the birth of the Tudor dynasty. This victory symbolized not only the end of one ruler but also the conclusion of an era and the beginning of a new age. Henry Tudor, now Henry VII, ascended to the throne and initiated a new era with the aim of bringing peace and stability to the country. With his ascension, Henry took the first steps of the Tudor dynasty, steering England away from internal conflicts and chaos, and beginning to shape the country's future. This new era encompassed not only a change in government, but also a significant transformation in England's history. Henry VII's succession led to profound changes in England's social and political landscape. The king implemented various reforms to ensure peace across the nation. These reforms brought significant changes both in domestic policy and foreign relations. Henry VII's government made great efforts to reshape England's national identity while working to ensure the country's peace and stability. Dear friends, we are nearing the end of our journey through the depths of time, as the echoes of the famous battle at Bosworth Field slowly come to a close. Now let's take a look at the lessons this historical event has provided us and the legacy it has left throughout history. The battle at Bosworth Field not only marked the end of a government and an era, but also left deep and lasting impacts that shaped England's future. This battle demonstrated how complex and significant the struggle for power can be throughout history. The fall of Richard III and the victory of Henry VII were pivotal moments that altered the course of history. Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field offered a new beginning for his government and the Tudor dynasty. This event transformed not only England's political landscape, but also its social and cultural dynamics. The Tudor dynasty, under Henry VII, ushered in a long period of peace, which led to profound changes in England's economic and social structures. These historical events illustrate the importance of the struggle for power and how a country's fate can change. The battle at Bosworth Field also serves as a crucial example of how leaders and peoples throughout history have resisted and fought under challenging circumstances. Dear friends, our historical journey ends here, but the lessons and impacts of Bosworth Field and the Wars of the Roses remain relevant today. History can help shape our decisions in the present by providing us with stories from the past. As we trace the remnants of history, we also learn the lessons they offer. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey. I hope this exploration of the depths of history has conveyed the fascinating world of the past and the significance of these major events. Great events like the echoes of Bosworth Field and the establishment of the Tudor dynasty offer valuable lessons, and understanding these lessons greatly contributes to our comprehension of the past. In our upcoming historical journeys, we will continue to delve into such significant events and their impacts on today's world. I look forward to exploring history's stories and lessons with you as we dive into new discoveries and intriguing narratives. Until the next video series, farewell, keep following the traces of the past, and enjoy your explorations in history. Thank you and goodbye.